You know, anger and passion kind of go hand in hand sometimes. The things we're passionate about are generally the things that anger us the most when something goes wrong, whether that be our family or our children or faith. And that's something that I think we see repeatedly within our lives. And Jesus had a lot of anger and a lot of passion in his life. Sometimes when I get kind of aggravated at myself for maybe getting angry about things or maybe kind of letting things get in my head a little bit, I think about Jesus and I think about the things that angered him and the things that he was passionate about. And I feel like those are things that I should also be passionate about in my life. And so I think, it's kind of interesting, isn't it, the scourge of cords. And, we think of Jesus cleansing the temple in John's gospel when he took time to make a scourge of cords. I often think about that passage. We think of anger as being impulsive, rage we might call it. We get angry in a minute. Something sets us off. Somebody knows the right buttons to push. I think if you know somebody long enough, you probably know what you can do to make somebody mad. And I know that seems odd. I know I don't like to say that, make somebody mad, because, we choose to get mad, literally. Nobody can make you get mad, but, you kind of know what I mean. And so we deal with that, don't we? But anger isn't always immediate. It's not always, a rage. It's not always something that just, flows out of us immediately, although sometimes it does. Sometimes anger is more deep-rooted, more deep-seated. It's something that we have to kind of deal with. And there's things that angered Jesus, and one of those things was the human condition, and that's kind of broad. I'll lay that on you. That's kind of broad, The human condition, humanity itself, angered Jesus. The idea that we get so upset over things that aren't important and big things don't bother us. Jesus criticized the Pharisees of that. You tithe the mint, the dill, and the cumin, but you neglect the weightier measures of the law, Jesus said. He wanted them to be concerned with justice and with mercy and with greater things, and yet they let little things get in the way. Humanity itself, I think, is a disappointment to God. I think it has been for centuries. He obviously was disappointed in the days of Noah when he destroyed the world. I'm sure he's not that happy with us today. I don't see how he could be happy with us, really. I mean, if you look at humanity as a whole, I don't think God looks down on this earth as a whole and thinks, oh, these are really a great bunch of people. I think he sees certain people he likes, I hope. Us, right? But I mean, as far as humanity as a whole, we're not that great, are we? We fight with each other. We war with each other. We can't agree. We can't get along. We divide over all kinds of things. We have all kinds of issues, don't we, in the world? Issues that we have to deal with. In John 11:35, it's the shortest verse of the Bible, right? John 11:35, Jesus wept. And yet that speaks volumes, doesn't it, about Christ? People argue, why did he weep? Well, he wept because he was sad. Lazarus dead. Lazarus wasn't going to stay dead. Jesus knew that. He was on the inside, right? Maybe he did. Maybe that sadness did bother him. Maybe it did affect him. Maybe he did weep because Lazarus had to go through death. But the more I read that passage, I always come away with the idea that Jesus wept because the people didn't understand him. The world didn't understand him. Those people closest to him, Mary and Martha, didn't really understand him. Didn't really get him, right? Didn't really understand what he was about. It was the human condition, right? Humanity. If you would have been there, he wouldn't have died. This idea that somehow we can limit God or limit what God can do, and yet in that time, Jesus wept. In John 11:38, same passage, Lazarus. Jesus, again, being deeply moved within, the Bible says. Deeply moved within. Passion. Isn't that what passion is? It's being deeply moved within ourselves. Something that bothers us, that eats away at us, something that we're passionate about. And we have those things within our lives, and that was Jesus here. He was deeply moved within. In 11:43, same passage, when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, right? You see that in what Jesus did, in the way that he responded to what was going on and his response to the situation. It's interesting, I think, in John 11, where it says he cried out with a loud voice. Why? Because he was afraid Lazarus couldn't hear him? You know, he cried out with a loud voice because he wanted them to know. He wanted everybody to know that he did it, that God did it, that he was Lord, that he was Christ, that he was who he said that he was. Passion was a big part of the life of Christ, and anger was a big part of the life of Christ. And there's just no way around that. It's a human emotion. Jesus was upset with rulers being placed over people, wasn't he? Not rulers of the Romans or rulers of the world, but he was upset with religious rulers being placed over the people. He was upset with scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees in the Jewish court, and the idea that somehow those men who looked so right could be so wrong and led people in the wrong place. Jesus never went to the rulers of the people, rulers of the Jews. Jesus went to those people who they ruled. You ever notice that? It doesn't really make sense, does it? If Jesus came to be king of the Jews, why did he go to the rulers of the Jews? Because he didn't like them. Right? He didn't like what they were. He didn't like what they were about. He wasn't endorsing their mythology. He wasn't endorsing their theology. He was against it. He said, this isn't the way it should be. This isn't how God intended for this to be. For you to rule over this people, for you to lord yourself and your righteousness over those people around you. This was never God's intent. And yet you've done this repeatedly in your life, and it angered Jesus. And how many times in the Bible does Jesus rebuke them and call them a brood of vipers and tell them that they're going to go to hell? Doesn't he? I mean, Jesus literally tells them, you are going to go to hell. That's pretty severe. I mean, that's about as severe as you can get. And Jesus was not ashamed to tell them that, was he? Not even a little bit. Jesus was not a politically correct individual. Jesus did that. They were watching him to see if someone would heal on the Sabbath. You see this? What were they trying to trick him in? Trying to hold him up in some rule of law, something of law, seeing if he would heal on the Sabbath. Jesus was upset with him. Jesus pushed it because he wanted their heart to be right, not their mythology to be right. He said, don't do this, right? He said to them, come forward, and he did. And then he says, is it lawful to do good or harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill? That's a very big statement. And then after looking around with anger, that's not the picture we see of Christ, is it? That's not the little postcard picture of Jesus. You ever looked around at somebody with anger? I've done that a few times in my life, once or twice. Right? I mean, you kind of know when I'm angry. Susie does. She knows Angry Rex, you know. And she looked around there, and he looked around with anger at them, with anger. He was angry with their hardness of heart, angry that they cared more about the day than about the man, angry that they didn't understand that a man who had the authority to heal somebody on the Sabbath was Lord of that Sabbath and could do what he wanted. He was angry with their condition, angry with their heart, angry with everything about this situation. Over and over, Jesus saw theology and mythology and all these things get in the way of what he wanted to accomplish. I love the story of the man that was born blind, and the reason I gravitate towards that story sometimes is not because of the blind man. It's because of the apostles' response to that man being born blind. I mean, the man's born blind, the man's sitting there, the man's blind, the man's there with Jesus Christ who can make the man see. He can heal the guy. The guy can see again. And he goes, and they go by the man, and you know what? They didn't say, Jesus, would you heal this guy that's blind? Would you have compassion on this man that can't see? You know what they said? Who sinned, this man or his parents? They didn't care about the man. They didn't care about his problem. They didn't care about his affliction. They didn't have any compassion. They simply asked Jesus the question, who sinned? Why did God curse him? Why is he this way? Jesus had a lot of reasons to be angry. Angry with us, angry with humanity in general, with the way that we perceive the world, the things that we choose to do, that we choose to fight about, that we choose to let upset us. Are those really the things, important things in life that we should be angry about? So many of the things in my life that make me mad are things to do with me, right? They're things to do with me, with how I want, what Rex wants, what Rex desires. I don't know I have as much godly anger as I should have as I have Rex anger. And sometimes that's a little bit disturbing. Jesus had this ability to look beyond that, look beyond people, look towards what God would have him to do, what God would desire. He looked around them with anger. You don't see that on a t-shirt, right? The angry Jesus. See loving Jesus, see buddy Jesus, see Jesus with a big heart, friend Jesus with his hand sticking out. You ever seen a t-shirt that was angry Jesus? Angry Jesus. You know, I don't know how that would look like for sure, but you don't ever see that because we don't like to think of Jesus that way, and yet he was, wasn't he? He was angry a lot. And, you know, the other thing is he was angry about kids being pushed aside. You know, he used kids as an illustration a lot of times, talking about those people who are young in the kingdom and don't offend the children. That was metaphorically speaking of those who are young in Christ. But make no mistake about it, Jesus also got angry about kids being pushed aside, didn't he? I think that's something that you see with Jesus more than any other thing, is this idea that society had, that kids weren't important or kids weren't valuable or kids didn't have worth or merit. And Jesus was that way with all the people of the world that the world pushed aside. Jesus cared about the lame. Jesus cared about the blind. Jesus cared about the sick. A lot of Jesus' work revolved around women who were overlooked in that society terribly. A lot of what Jesus did was with children. You know, if you look at that passage that Jesus was speaking about, and in Mark 10, it says they were bringing children to him so that he might touch them, and the disciples rebuked them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, "Permit the children to come to me, do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Who the world thought was unimportant, Jesus thought was important. Who does not receive the kingdom of God like a child will not enter. And he took, look at this, he took them in his arms and began blessing them and laying hands on them. You know, Jesus didn't just say, "Don't let them come to me." Jesus embraced them. He took them in his arms. He held them. Can you imagine that? You know, traditionally, there's a disciple that was on Ephesus, a disciple of John. His name was Polycarp, and he's one of the early church fathers. And tradition says that Polycarp, who was John's disciple on Ephesus in John's later days, that Polycarp was actually one of the children that Jesus blessed and put his arms around in this particular instance. You know, the children of today are the church of tomorrow, aren't they? They're the people. They're the kids. They're really who's important. You know, I love our children, and I try to recognize them. I try to know their names. I try to spend time with them. I take them to get suckers. I'm just the ladder to get suckers to most of our children, but that's all right. You know, Rex will be that ladder. I'm okay with that because I believe our children are so, so valuable and so, so, so important. And I just think that we need to embrace our children and love our children. And Jesus got angry. He rebuked them, didn't he? He touched them, but the disciples rebuked them. And Jesus, he was indignant. You know what that means, to be indignant? He was upset, wasn't he? He was beside himself. Why would you be this way? Why would you keep these children from coming to me? You know, it's funny how they always tried to protect Jesus from the world, and Jesus didn't want to be protected from the world. You ever notice that? Blind Bartimaeus on the side of the road, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And they were saying, "Shh, be quiet, you know. He doesn't have time for you." And the Bible says the more they told Bartimaeus to be quiet, the louder he yelled, "Jesus, Jesus," right? "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus called Bartimaeus over, and he gave him his sight. The very ones that they wanted to protect Jesus from are the very ones that Jesus wanted to be in touch with. Jesus was angry that they tried to put him on that pedestal, wasn't he? He didn't want to be on that pedestal. He didn't want to be a ruler over them. He wanted to be part of them. And I think that angered Jesus severely when he was in that situation. Jesus hated self-righteous people. You know, I can honestly say that, and I don't feel bad about it. Jesus hated self-righteous people. He did. He loathed them. Jesus hated the self-righteous. He hated people who thought they were better than somebody else and judged themselves based on another person. Over and over in the Bible, we see that, don't we? From the Pharisee and the tax collector who came to pray, and Jesus said, who was vindicated? The tax collector, right? Jesus over and over said their self-righteousness was their downfall. And their self-righteousness would never get them to heaven. And their self-righteousness is what was going to condemn them in front of God. Look at the woes of Matthew 23, and you'd really have to read all of Matthew 23, but gosh, Matthew 23, right? The 7 woes of Matthew 23. Woe to you, woe to you, whoa, 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 whoa. Bad things are going to happen, right? I don't like how you live. I don't like who you are. I don't like the way you treat people. I don't like how you think you're better than anybody else. He criticized them. You enlarge your phylacteries. You enlarge the borders of your garments. You want to be seen of men. You want the chief seats. You want honor. You want praise of men and not praise of God. And that's what you look for in your life. Jesus criticized them, called them hypocrites, cleaning the outside of the cup, but inside they're full of self-indulgence. You see that word, self-indulgence. They're worried more about themselves than they are about other people. You blind Pharisees, hypocrites, whitewashed tombs, he calls them, right? Woe to you, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets. Said you wouldn't have killed them, but you testify against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. If you read all of Matthew 23 is nothing but woes. Woe, 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 woe. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Woe to you, rulers. Woe to who you think you are. Jesus criticized them. Jesus talked to them. Jesus told them all kinds of things that I don't even know how I got away with it. I really don't. I don't know how you can look at people that are rulers like they were and get away with what Jesus said. Ultimately, he didn't, right? Ultimately, he didn't get away with it. Ultimately, they were going to nail him to a cross. But he never embraced who they were. Jesus always chose his battles, and he chose them well. You know, when my kids were little, and we were trying to be parents, because really that's all you just try to be parents. You're never really parents, but you give it your best. And so we were trying to be parents, and Yelene Reed, who was here then, she told me one thing with my kids that always stuck in my brain. She goes, with children, she says, you just need to choose which hill you're willing to die on, right? And that's true, you know. You need to choose what's the most important thing, because if you fight them on every little thing in their life, you're just going to be their enemy. But there's some things you have to stand up and fight them on, right? But God knew that. Jesus knew that. He literally chose the hill that he would die on. He literally chose life. You know what, one thing that angered him was selling God. And boy, I think if he looked at us today, oh, would he be ashamed of us, wouldn't he? Selling God, don't we? You know, he went into the temple, right? He turned over the tables. He made a scourge of cords. I love John. I always use John. You know, it's in the Synoptics, right? End of the Synoptics, beginning of John. But I always use John because I think John shows the intent of Jesus. It doesn't just show the passion. When you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you get the idea is he just walked in and flew off the handle and got mad, started turning everything over. But when you read John's gospel, you understand that he'd been mad for 30 years. You know, hadn't he? He'd been mad for 30 years. He'd been walking in that temple his entire life. They left him there at 12 years old. He'd been walking into that temple his entire life, and he had been mad his whole life because of that. You ever thought about that? He didn't just get mad that day, that time. He'd been mad he'd been mad his whole life. But he wasn't able to do anything about it. Then finally, when he came out and became who he was, and he did these miracles, and he started his ministry, he said, enough's enough, had enough. I've been mad for 30 years, right? This is it. It wasn't a spur of the moment thing. He contemplated it. He thought about it. I've often wondered, I don't know how long it takes to make a scourge of cords. How long does it take? I don't even know how you do that. I'm not sure how you do that. But can you imagine Jesus sitting around the fire at night with the apostles up on the mount, wherever he was? Or maybe he was at Mary and Martha's house, wherever he was. And Jesus was sitting around at night, and he's working on this thing, right? It's like crocheting, right? He's working on this, and the apostles are like, what are you doing, Jesus? I'm making a scourge of cords. Why are you doing that? Well, I'm gonna drive out some money changers and stuff at the temple and cause a big scene, and we go in there, and they're all going to think that I'm a lunatic. Are y'all in? right? You know, we don't think about it like that, but I do. I think about Jesus doing them, tying that thing and thinking, man, oh man, this is going to be good, right? I'm going to show them. They're going to get, this is going to, they're going to be talking about this 2,000 years from now. This is how good this is fixing to be, right? Can you imagine that? But he knew, didn't he? And that's the thing about passion, and that's the thing about anger. It's not always bad. You know, when we think about it, and we think about passion, and we think about people being passionate for something, we think about anger, and sometimes anger can be really bad. I totally, 100% agree with you. I've done some terrible things when I was angry. But sometimes anger can be extremely productive in a person's life. It's not always the worst thing. It's really not. So many things in our world that are good started because somebody got mad. You ever thought about that? You always think of mothers against drunk driving. You know why that started? Because them women had enough, right? They had enough people killing their kids driving drunk. They had enough. A lot of organizations in this world started because people got angry about something and decided they could change it, and their anger was the catalyst for change. Jesus' anger was often a catalyst for change, but Jesus got anger over selfish ambition, putting ourselves over others. Jesus says it in Matthew 5, "For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." You know, I think about this passage. I think about how righteous the scribes and Pharisees appeared. I mean, they dressed right, they looked right, they acted right, they gave right, they tithed right, they did everything right as you could be, and they were going to hell, sure as the world, and Jesus wasn't ashamed to tell them that. And Jesus said, if our righteousness doesn't surpass that, isn't greater than that, greater than their selfish ambition, greater from what they wanted in this world and not what God wanted in this world. And that's us so many times. You know, when we put God first and our anger and our passion is based on the things that make God angry, based on sin in the world and unrighteousness in the world and injustice in the world, then that anger and that passion can motivate us to make a change, can motivate us to do something that's productive. But when our anger is misplaced, it's destructive, isn't it? When our anger is misplaced, when we get angry over things that we should leave alone, when anger destroys our own soul and the souls of others, when anger is infectious, which it is, and then anger causes things to go bad for a lot of people, which it does. We've all seen it, haven't we? We saw the riots, we see mobs, we see what anger can do and how anger breeds and how anger festers, and it's not something that as Christians we desire or want to happen. Anger has to be something that's thought about, that's contemplated, something that was righteous. I think there is such a thing as righteous anger. The Bible says to be angry and sin not, and I think sometimes that's a hard line to draw, to be angry and yet not to sin, because a lot of times anger produces sin within us. It tells us to do things and act like things and do things that aren't godly. But anger can also be productive. To be angry and sin not. You know, as a Christian in our world today, I don't know how you can not be angry about some things. I just don't know how you can not be. I'm angry about things. There's things in this world that I'm very angry about. But the trick is to be angry and sin not, to let that anger be productive, not destructive. Jesus taught us how to do that. You say, Rex, it's not true. Jesus went into there, he went into the temple, and he destroyed all that stuff. You know, if you really look at those accounts, Jesus really didn't destroy anything, did he? Never says that he hit anybody, never says that he hurt anybody, never says that he hurt an animal. Jesus drove them out of the temple. Jesus overturned the tables. Really didn't do any long-term damage, did he? But he did make his point, right? He did make his point. You know, Jesus didn't go in there to hurt him. He didn't go in there to kill him. He could have called down fire from heaven if he'd wanted to do that. Jesus went in there to make change. Is why Jesus went in there. Jesus went in there to make a change, to make things different. So I think as Christians, you know, maybe that's not the Jesus we like to think about. You know, maybe we don't like to think about the angry Jesus, the throwing the tables over Jesus, but you know, Jesus knew there was a time to be angry. Jesus knew there was a time for things to change. And I think sometimes as Christians, you know, we forget that. We can be angry. It's okay. You can be angry about things in the world. You can be angry about things in your life. You can be angry. Just let it be productive. And I think that's something that maybe I've struggled with my entire life, but I'm trying to be better. So anyway, something to think about this week, huh? The angry Jesus. Something to think about. Thanks for your time this evening. If we can help you in any way, won't you